Just like last week, this episode is in English.
Ihr hört die Erium Podcast, der Data Science und Machine Learning Podcast für Studienabsolventen und Young Professionals.
Today's guest is the CEO of Chat Roulette, Andrew Doan. He's going to tell us how machine learning and data science influences and improves Chat Roulette, what Chat Roulette's future looks like, and why his career at Domino's failed. Stay tuned. Web developer, software engineer, and consultant in several different companies, senior architect at Skyfi, CTO at Goodlord, and first CTO and now CEO of Chat Roulette. I probably missed out on a bunch of other milestones, but I'm still very happy to talk to him today. Andrew Doan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Andrew, how are you doing? What have you been up to today?
I'm tired. We're getting to the end of a long project we've been working on to replatform Chat Roulette, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about. And we're just in the process now of starting to test that with real users and, going through the process of trying to get something ready for production use. So all of us are a little bit short on sleep, but nonetheless excited to have something that will kind of power the next generation of Chat Roulette, I suppose. So yeah.
Cool. So let's jump right into it. So now I'm pretty sure that most of our listeners know what Chat Roulette is, but maybe there are some that don't know it. Can you just maybe quickly explain the concept of Chat Roulette? What is it all about?
Yeah, okay. So Chat Roulette is a one-time internet phenomenon, and still kind of globally recognized brand, as you say. We connect you with a stranger at random and then invite you to entertain and connect with each other however you choose to do so. So that describes what Chat Roulette is, but Chat Roulette also was a kind of a victim of its success in the early days. And so the freedom offered through the Chat Roulette model was ultimately our burden, because unclear standards and trolling ultimately led to frustration and decay in the community. And so, in 2020, we're relaunching Chat Roulette with a mission to take back the share that we've bled to our more featureful competitors, and relaunching Chat Roulette as a modern social and ultimately network-driven media platform.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of team is tackling this task? So, from what kind of industry branch do the people that you work with originate from? So, I also saw on LinkedIn that you're currently hiring a bunch of people. So, can you give us a little bit of insight onto who is working at Chat Roulette?
Yeah. Okay. So it's a pretty interesting mix, actually, because we've managed to attract an impressive caliber of talent, but they really come from all over the place. So I personally come from a mix of startups and traditional media, some consulting. It's a fairly typical, or fairly similar rather, mix to our chief product officer. And then we've got a number of other people from people with very academic backgrounds through to people from gaming, but I wouldn't say any specific industry. Well, I wouldn't say we specifically draw from any particular industry.
And what kind of tasks do you fulfill as a CEO in particular?
Yeah, so a big part for me is to try and help both us that work on the project and the community that use the product, and also the people that we want to use the product, to realize that we're reopening for business, that we're tackling a lot of the problems that we had previously. As you know, inappropriate content on Chat Roulette has really been the the gravity, as it were, that's prevented Chat Roulette from really taking off. A huge part of what I do is to keep us focused on trying to solve that problem as efficiently and as well as possible.
Yeah. So to me, it sounds like you have like this overview over everything and just make sure that everything is going in a certain direction or in the right direction.
Yeah, yeah.
So would you say this is monotonous, or does it have like a lot of variety? Because I figure that if you work on a, let's say, certain problem, so for instance inappropriate content, um is this like one big challenge, or does this split up during the process into a bunch of smaller challenges that pop up every day? Oh, there's this new problem, and then there's this that we have to consider, or what does this look like?
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, I'd say that the job of working at Chat Roulette is far from monotonous. Uh, Executionally, it's basically a research project, which in my view is the best type of work. Um, and I think that Chat Roulette itself is interesting as it's a startup with unique technical and commercial challenges, but it's also a piece of internet history. So when we talk about research, we don't just talk about researching new technical techniques. We're also talking about kind of delicately but deliberately evolving the product so that we keep what works, but ultimately discard what doesn't work.
And so I totally agree, and I think that you're like this, or not you personally, but the company Chatroulette is like this perfect example of how do we tackle or handle inappropriate content, let it be hate speech, or I don't know, certain body parts on videos and pictures. How do we handle this on the internet in this new age, or in the year 2020, if you want? And now there's like we have, of course, yeah. So we have, of course, this big buzzword on our podcast, of course, data science and machine learning.
Mhm.
So can you maybe talk a little bit about that? How does data science and machine learning influence Chatroulette, or are you far away from that?
I think the short answer would be to say that it really influences everything we do ultimately. So most directly, as you suggest, is content control, so moderation. And I think that on the one hand, while it's tempting to believe that um, technology and technical innovation are the dominant force in product innovation, I think we all know from experience that empirically that's not true. Uh, with Chat Roulette, um, what's possible with ML and A now with ML and AI is now so good that if it was available when Chat Roulette was founded, I think the story would have been very different. So another way of saying all that is to say that the technology that is available now is so vastly different and so much better than what was available 10 years ago, that a lot of things that weren't even conceivable in the past are now very possible now. So, and to put it in context with real numbers, so some of the things that we do around content control, ultimately trying to understand if people are acting inappropriately or not, and this is ultimately in the new system that we're putting forward. But we were using kind of state-of-the-art techniques, and there's a blog post about this where for a while we were using off-the-shelf tools from major technology vendors to try and detect inappropriate content in computer in samples. And the solution that we had there to what we can operate today, we're about 500 times better than we were. And the difference that makes is I can't overstate how important it is. Ultimately, the viability of something like Chat Roulette depends on us being able to understand that people are safe and secure and that they're not being exposed to stuff that they wouldn't want to. Now, the Chat Roulette of today, we don't do a very good job of that. but we've invested very considerably in R&D ultimately to get as good as we can be there, and are now using a variety of techniques and actually currently trialing a new vendor to solve that problem more completely. And where we've got to today is, we can. I think we're really close to being able to have one of the most competitive answers to that question of anyone, certainly in our space.
Now, one more question about this topic that would be interesting to me is like the word inappropriate is very hard to define. So it could be like politically inappropriate. So, or it could be like just inappropriate in general. Like how do you? Is it even possible for you to distinguish between all those kind of shapes of inappropriateness, or how do you define it yourself? Is there like a policy you have? Okay, this is inappropriate and this is not. How do you decide that?
Yeah, it's a really long question. So the cleanest way to answer it is to say that ultimately inappropriate content, when it comes down to Chat Roulette, is ultimately content that your partner is, very much not expecting to be exposed to, and certainly without consent. And so, in our case, there's a history of people, exposing themselves on camera and various other things. And I think that history soon will be very much in Chat Roulette's past. It's certainly not part of the future. Um, but that's ultimately the dominant piece of inappropriate content that we have. But
Yeah.
I think part of where we're taking the platform um, is to provide more flexibility with allowing people to choose who they speak to and what they speak about. And eventually, the question of inappropriate content goes beyond just, in a general sense, what's kind of inappropriate at a dinner party, um, and it goes into, well, let's imagine it's a Spanish language channel and you're speaking English. What does that mean, for instance? And I think they're all broadly part of the same question. But to be honest, those elements um, of moderation are much better understood, and there are tools and techniques that exist that are able to handle that. But in particular, the challenge of dealing with, at our scale, which is, kind of at the moment around 4 million users a month, the challenge of dealing with um, inappropriate content accurately at that scale is not insignificant. And ultimately, you really need to have very accurate models to make sure that we're, um, banning the people that aren't playing by the rules as quickly as possible, but obviously banning or removing from the general population the people that, or not removing people from the population that are doing the right thing.
Cool. This sounds very promising. Um, so yeah, let's maybe now move on to talk a little bit more about you and your career
Hmm.
and how you came to be the CEO of
Hmm.
Chatroulette. Um, so in the intro, we got a glimpse of the several stations you've worked at, and I was not kidding when I said that there are many more. Um, so, can you maybe explain to us how did this come to be that you were at so many stations? Did you have like a particular goal in mind that you chased and then maybe now found at Chat Roulette, or can you maybe talk a little bit about the history of you, Andrew?
Yeah. So um, I started out in technology pretty young because I grew up in Singapore, and there was a real push when I grew up to get people into programming, and ultimately I actually tried working at Domino's for a little while, and it turns out I'm just terrible at every part of that. And just as an anecdote, the people when I was there, they used to talk about order to oven, and people get the pizzas from order to oven in 10 seconds. And I remember just watching it happen. And it's like, yeah, I'm never going to be able to do that. It took me like 90 seconds. But I pretty much from a young age, I got into trying to do programming projects and starting to do things for people, and ended up doing. I built something like for my local video store when I was, just an early teenager, and it led really naturally into getting into internet programming, which is just becoming a thing. And so a lot of the first part of my career was working on startups, and I worked on a project in the UK when I was a student, which was building this is for Killick and Co Stockbrokers, which was building I think it was the first share trading app in the UK, like consumer share trading app. And that really got me hooked on the feeling of building like software products. And so I kept chasing that high for a long time, and then eventually created my own consultancy back in Australia that we built products for people all over the all over the map. We built things for in defense, in finance, in media, but eventually kind of found our niche in ultimately what is we'd probably now think of like as data engineering projects. And so after that, I just had enough of consulting, and so I got into moved back to London, and I was the CTO of a property tech company there called Good Lord, which was a real rocket ship, and I suppose the first just really successful startup that I was a part of, that made me realize that just how different the experience is when you're definitely onto a sure thing. And that was a really awesome business, but ultimately was getting to the point where the model was starting to shape up a bit, and the real challenge of that first bit, the early stage company, is the thing I'm most interested in, and that challenge was largely kind of solved. And through that business, ultimately, I was introduced to Andrei Ternovsky, who is the founder of Chat Roulette, and he's an amazing and very convincing character. And we had a bunch of early conversations talking about what he was trying to do with the business. At that stage, he was he had just hired a bunch of consultants to work on the project, and he had stopped his full-time involvement in it, and that's more or less where I got involved initially to help try and manage the consulting, the consultants that he had pulled together, and then eventually kind of took on a more permanent type role as a CTO, and then ultimately to where I am now, where my job is much more on the commercial side, trying to figure out the future of Chat Roulette ultimately.
So now looking at that, so you come more from a technological background,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty different from what you do now.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any particular reason that you made this decision to become the CEO now instead of the CTO, like as a comparison? Did you want to try something new, or did you just see your, let's say, your ideas are like can be fulfilled in a better way when you are the CEO, or can you maybe elaborate more on that?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different ways to answer this question, and I would say that
Mhm.
what's more obvious now than it was when I started out in software is that the distinction between um, that there's less of a single track that exists in uh, technology career progression. You can be perfectly comfortable just being an engineer without ever feeling like you need to get into technology management. And for the most part these days, that doesn't even really necessarily affect your you know salary prospects, for want of a better term. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me, I I got into technology management when I was fairly young, and I really liked technology management, and that led into business. And I was always doing kind of all of it. I was always um, operating uh, operating my business ultimately, which we grew to a reasonable size. And but at the same time, I was always involved as a kind of CTO. And so my own journey is constantly going back and forth between being a commercial person and ultimately being a technical leader. And I think that Chat Roulette is the next example of that. But I also feel like I had spent a long time with Andre talking about his vision for Chat Roulette ultimately, and I felt like I understood it sufficiently well and had a strong enough understanding of the executional challenges that it just felt right that I would take that role rather than we would look for someone else to take the role. But yeah, my own background is always uh, bridging across technology and technology management and ultimately being commercial.
Mm-hmm. And looking back now on your career, would you do something different, or is there was there like a remarkable, very formative event for you?
I think the most formative event would have been that first project I worked on at Killick and Co. In a literal sense, just because I happened to step into this absolutely awesome team, and I was 18 at the time, basically, and I yeah I stepped into this awesome team, and I was hired as a Java developer, and the team were just this really theoretically excellent group. And I remember, I knew how to program at that point, but just stepping into this um, absolutely um, brilliant group was, well, firstly, I think it really it gave me the sense of kind of wonder that I think you can get working in software. That it's a really fun experience being surrounded by people that just kind of like to solve problems. And I think that really set up the love for me that I really wanted to do that for the rest of my life. So in terms of a formative experience, I think that's probably the one I would point to.
And now, maybe to conclude, is there something that you can, or is there any tip that you can give our complexity masters, our listeners of the podcast? Um, any particular, maybe rule of thumb, or any tip that led you during your career that you can give to our listeners?
Um, I don't know about how it would relate to me necessarily, but I have worked with many data science and ML people, and at one point ran a business that did this. And I would say the biggest tip, if it's not obvious, is that outside of academia, um, data science, ML, and data engineering are all fundamentally consultative. So I
Hmm.
think that to be successful, people have to get really good at asking questions, because almost certainly their weakest link is not being able to engage with the people who need their expertise to be able to answer the right questions. And in fact, what I've noticed is that the better somebody is technically, the more likely it is that they're probably not so great at asking questions. I think we all tend to lean on where we're most comfortable, and if you're most comfortable, uh, you know, with your head in the data, then you're probably not as comfortable in, probing really getting deep into why someone's trying to get something solved. But it's the experience that I have had in multiple different capacities is that you hire people who are brilliant, and they can. It's a bit like the experience of a dog chasing a bone. You can give them a really hard problem and they'll chase it, and they will just go after it completely because that's in their nature. But the question is ultimately you kind of want them to ask, well, why am I chasing this bone? Why? And that's the thing. And the experience of working with someone who really gets that is really awesome. And I think that's ultimately when you see the really, really good wins in the application of data science to particularly commercial problems, are when people ask, or when you get the technical people to have a really robust understanding of the business need ultimately beyond how it was actually framed to them. They really drill in and get a really strong understanding of the need.
Andrew, thank you very much for this awesome conversation. I wish you and your company all the best for the new release of Chat Roulette. And yeah, have a nice day.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
This was my conversation with Andrew Doan. I was fascinated by the way he and his team improved Chat Roulette. And it goes to show that you can do a ton of good and inspiring things with data science and machine learning. Do you agree with Andrew when he says that data science and machine learning are both fundamentally consultative? Talk to us on our social media. And if you want to know what political data science is and how social bots influence a political landscape, then you should listen to last week's episode with political data scientist Juan Carlos Medina Serrano. It is linked in the description. Master the complexity.
Jeden Dienstag erscheint eine neue Folge von The Erium Podcast. Um auf dem Laufenden zu bleiben, folgt uns auf Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und LinkedIn. Wenn ihr uns unterstützen wollt, gebt uns eine 5-Sterne-Bewertung auf Apple Podcasts, folgt uns auf Spotify und empfehlt uns weiter. Bis zum nächsten Mal bei The Erium Podcast.